So our static Jaro and friends cleared week 1, which is great, but the sad part was this tier's a bit too easy, which kinda lessens the satisfaction of clearing week 1 this time. You can see from the statistic of the log itself of how much week 1 clear happens, and also how fast the world race was done. It took less than 10 hours for Team Grind to kill it, which is great for them since they have been very consistent throughout Endwalker and definitely deserving of this placement. But for me, a Savage World race done in less than 10 hours is quite sad. The mechanic itself was pretty fun, but the DPS check was definitely too low. Even Yoshipi acknowledged it, but I'll get into that later because I want to talk about this review per fight with our statics POV. So yeah, this is Aylaveen and here's my raid review for Arcadion Light Heavyweight Savage. So our static was composed of our usual core members, me as a tank, Luca as caster, Aina and Bai as healers, and our mascot Jaro as physical range. Most of us can flex into different roles, but these are the classes that they want to play, so I have to look for a tank and 2 melees. We called back our healer from top Nyonya but asked him to play flex melee, and he ended up playing red mage throughout the tier because Luca wants to play Picto and we don't have a res caster. We found a tank quite quickly from our friend group who started raiding mid Endwalker that we saw was pretty promising, but we did have difficulty finding a melee. And Jaro actually ended up going back to ninja like Abyssos and we got Nash as our physical range. So our comp was Warrior, Gunbreaker, Astro, Sage, Ninja, Red Mage, Dancer, Picto. On paper we got the hardest hitting supports, but probably some of the worst DPS comps other than the Picto. But I believe in my friends carrying their own DPS, so we proceed and turns out the DPS check was non-existent anyway, so yay. So the first floor Black Hat was pretty good in my opinion. The double bait was expected, but not that hard. But I would say the first mechanic that makes us prog a bit was the copycat, but it's not very hard either. The real prog happens on the clones. I remember we had 2% remembering different cats to reduce thinking capacity, but the DPS check was very non-existent. We have some damage down and a DPS dying, but we still didn't see raining cats, let alone the devour mechanic at the end. And that's without crafted gears, since it was day 1. So in my opinion, the DPS check was way too low, and it's such a shame because the fight was so fun. And I really wanted to see the last 2 mechanics, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. So we went to M2S on the same day, Honeybee Lovely. I hate this fight so much because the whole fight was actually so easy, but the challenging part for us was the Alaram Pheromones one. And not because the mech was difficult, but because we made a big mistake of thinking that there's some kind of pattern here, and trying to come up with different strats like Grand Octet. We did reach Enrage at the end of day 1, but people were just too tired. So we cleared on day 2 on the first few pulls after we came to terms on how to do it. But despite that, this fight was actually pretty fun, and playing melee was very satisfying when you're able to get that one extra greed. Cause every mechanic here was actually greetable. I especially like the simplicity of the pair and spread mechanic, but sometimes they put casting so far behind that you might forget it if you don't type that in chat. But I genuinely hate the song because it's been stuck in my head ever since we started progging this, and even when we were progging M3, I kept hearing that in my head. Heck, I didn't even know what M3 BGM sounds like because of this song. Third floor. The third floor is stupid in the sense that the mechanic was actually not hard like M2, but it's more of a mids and heals check. It's so tricky that I had to change from Gunbreaker to Paladin because every raid wipes were physical. This was also the case for M1S, but I didn't realize that since we cleared M1 pretty quickly. But this time, the change was actually needed. I honestly think they should have spread out the damage types between magical and physical more evenly, so it doesn't make one tank obsolete and the other more relevant just because of mids. Mechanic wise, I think it's pretty fun. I like the concept of tag team, and the knockback towers was also cool. But I especially like the final fuse down design because it's simply the same mechanic that we're used to, a set of 2 spreads, but you have to see it on your character instead of your debuff timer, so I think that's pretty smart design choice. We actually cleared this fight on day 2, the same as M2, so it's not too bad. Moving on to M4, this fight song was the best, hands down. Not only because Chrissy My Queen sang the song, but because it's not as annoying as M2. This fight's proc was pretty fun for us. I really liked the witch hunt mechanic, and quickly after the first few pulls, our MT realized that we could do this clock pause. And the next day, we saw people posting the brain dead witch hunt, so we ended up using it. We did most mechanics pretty quickly, but our worst mechanic to proc was actually the spread on Witch Gleam 2 or Lightning Cage, in between the long and short set. Because we have to match the short and long for pairs, we ended up with some weird spread method and kept failing it, so I made the call to make it a fixed spread position and we immediately breezed through it. The iron cluster was not that bad because we knew the brain dead strat from start, but we just need some time with it as some of us kept standing a bit slanted and ended up shooting the different person. The transition was not bad, although some of us sometimes clip each other because of the spread AoE was pretty big, and we kept forgetting to dodge after the block. But we did saw phase 2 quite a few times at the end of day 3. Sadly, 3 of our static members had practice for upcoming tournament for another game, so we had to cut our proc short on day 4, where we were only able to proc less than 1 lockout. But we did proc throughout phase 2 quite a bit until Midnight and Swords, but we did struggle a bit on the spread and pair mechanic, but it was not too bad. And we kinda breezed through the Lightning Swords mechanic. On day 5, we finally get our full session and it was mostly Sunrays proc as it's quite tricky for us, especially with the laser beam that can easily clip each other. And the mechanic itself was quite punishing, even with a single death. It was very hard to recover. But after that, it was pretty much free and the DPS check was non-existent, even for a week 1 proc, so we did clear it at day 5. Overall, I feel this tier is pretty good. The mechanics was fun, and that's the most important part in my opinion. Yes, the DPS check was low and it's a bit too easy for a lot of people who have raided for quite some time, and yes, it takes the satisfaction of week 1 clear slightly away when you saw how much people actually cleared week 1. But I personally like the relaxed tone of this Savage before the hardcore that is ultimate. Comparing this tier with the previous ones that I have rated before since Shadowbringers with Addon Promise as my personal favorite, I feel like I would give this tier a 7.5 out of 10, which is pretty good, as I think it's still way better than Abyssos, maybe around the same level or slightly below Anabasis, but it's still pretty good. They just need to fix the DPS check, as I think this was unintended, where they finished the whole Savage testing, then suddenly came up with a lot of job buffs after hearing the feedback on 7.01. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about this raid tier. How far have you guys progressed, and are you having fun? Let me know in the comment section down below and I'll see you soon.